This solar system produces power when the sun isn't shining. It runs through the night. It delivers stable electricity without batteries. It can scale from a single building to an entire grid. And in controlled demonstrations, it has achieved capacity factors above 70%. That's not a typo. Most solar panels operate at 15 to 25% capacity factor depending on location. This system more than doubles that. It stores energy as heat at over 500 degrees Celsius. It converts that heat back into electricity on demand, and it does it using materials that don't degrade the way lithium batteries do. In 2019, a pilot system in Shanghai demonstrated continuous operation using this exact principle. In 2022, multiple utility-scale projects were announced across China, targeting hundreds of megawatts of deployment. Total installed capacity. Today, still a fraction of conventional solar. Meanwhile, photovoltaic systems have surpassed over 2,500 gigawatts globally. So the question is obvious. If this system solves solar's biggest problem, intermittency, why isn't it everywhere? By the end of this, you will understand exactly how this off-grid solar system works, why it can outperform traditional panels in real-world conditions, and why, despite all of that, it remains on the edge of adoption instead of dominating the market. To understand the system, you have to start with a limitation. Most people never think about. Solar panels don't fail at generating electricity. They fail at timing. They produce power when the sun is available, not when you need it. That mismatch forces every solar system into one of two paths. Either you store energy electrically using batteries, or you stay connected to the grid and use it as your backup. Both have costs. Lithium batteries degrade. They require complex management systems. They lose capacity over time. Grid dependence introduces another problem. You're no longer off-grid. You're outsourcing stability. So the idea behind this system is different. It doesn't try to store electricity. It stores heat. Because heat is easier to store, cheaper to store, and more stable over long periods. This brings us to the core concept: concentrated solar thermal storage. Instead of converting sunlight directly into electricity, this system uses mirrors to focus sunlight onto a receiver. That receiver heats a storage medium, often molten salt or solid materials like sand, to extremely high temperatures. Once heated, that thermal energy is stored, not for minutes, for hours, even days. And when electricity is needed, the stored heat is used to drive a turbine or engine, the same way conventional power plants operate. Steam spins a turbine. The turbine drives a generator. Electricity flows, which means this system behaves less like a solar panel and more like a traditional power plant that happens to use the sun as its fuel source. That distinction matters because traditional power plants provide something solar panels do not: dispatchability, the ability to produce power when demanded, not just when available. Now let's compare this to standard photovoltaic systems. A solar panel converts sunlight directly into electricity, but that process is limited. Typical commercial panels operate at 18 to 22% efficiency at the module level. System level efficiency drops further after inverter losses, wiring losses, and temperature effects. And temperature matters more than most people realize. As panels heat up, their efficiency drops. In hot climates, where solar resource is strongest, panels often lose 10 to 25% of their rated output. That's not a manufacturing issue, it's physics. Now contrast that with thermal systems. Higher temperatures do not reduce performance. They enable it. The hotter your storage medium, the greater the temperature difference driving your turbine. And that increases efficiency. So the same desert heat that degrades photovoltaic output improves thermal system performance. Now let's talk about storage. This is where the system becomes fundamentally different. A typical lithium-ion battery stores energy chemically. Over time, that chemistry degrades. Cycle it enough and capacity drops. Store it too long and it loses charge. Thermal storage doesn't behave that way. Molten salt systems, for example, can store energy with minimal loss for extended periods, and the materials themselves don't degrade in the same way. No rare metals, no complex chemistry, no cycle-based wear. You are storing energy as temperature, and temperature doesn't wear out. That is a critical distinction. Now, in large-scale implementations, these systems use 2 tanks, one hot, one cold. When excess solar energy is available, heat is transferred into the hot tank. When electricity is needed, that heat is pulled out, used to generate steam, and returned to the cold tank. Then the cycle repeats. This creates a continuous loop: charge during the day, discharge at night, or during peak demand, or whenever needed, which means the system can operate independently of sunlight for extended periods. And that is what makes it one of the most powerful off-grid solar concepts ever developed. Now let's look at real-world performance. In high solar irradiance regions, concentrated solar thermal systems with storage have achieved capacity factors between 40% and 70%. That is approaching the reliability of fossil fuel plants. For comparison, typical solar panel systems operate closer to 20%. Wind varies between 25 and 40%. This system sits at the top, not because it captures more sunlight, but because it uses what it captures more effectively. Now here is where things get interesting. Because if the physics is this strong and the performance is this consistent, why hasn't it replaced conventional solar? To answer that, we need to look at something most people ignore when evaluating technology. Not efficiency, not performance, economics. Because no matter how good a system is technically, if it loses on cost, it loses in the real world. And this is where the gap begins. Building a concentrated solar thermal plant is not simple. It requires precision mirrors, tracking systems, high-temperature materials, thermal storage infrastructure, and a conventional turbine generator system. This is not a panel you bolt onto a roof. It is an industrial installation, and that complexity translates directly into cost. In Part 2, we are going to break that down. Why these systems struggle to compete with rapidly falling solar panel prices. Why maintenance and scale become major barriers, and whether this technology still has a future, or if it is another example of something that worked perfectly in theory, but could not survive the market. Because the answer is not as simple as better technology wins. And in energy systems, it almost never is. Now we get to the part that actually decides whether a technology survives, not how well it performs, how well it competes. Because this system did not struggle because it failed technically. It struggled because it asked the market to accept complexity at a time when simplicity was getting cheaper every year. Start with what you are actually building. A photovoltaic system is fundamentally passive. Panels sit still, sunlight hits them, electricity flows. The only active component is the inverter. Everything else is static. A concentrated solar thermal system is the opposite. It is a machine. Mirrors track the sun continuously across 2 axes. A receiver absorbs concentrated heat at hundreds of degrees. Fluid circulates through pipes under pressure. Heat exchangers transfer energy between loops. A turbine spins. A generator produces electricity. Every one of those steps introduces moving parts, and moving parts introduce failure points, not hypothetical ones, predictable ones. Motors wear out, seals degrade, surfaces collect dust, alignment drifts over time, which means maintenance is not occasional. It is built into the system. Now compare that to solar panels. They degrade slowly, but they do not break in the same way. A panel losing 1% efficiency per year is not the same as a pump failing or a tracking system going offline. So right away, you are dealing with two different operating models. One is maintainable with minimal intervention. The other requires ongoing attention to keep performing at its peak. Now let's talk about cost, because this is where the gap becomes difficult to overcome. Building a thermal solar system is not just installing equipment, it is constructing infrastructure. Steel frameworks for mirror fields, precision mounting systems, high-temperature storage tanks, piping networks, a full power generation unit. Historically, that has placed these systems in the range of several $1,000s per kilowatt. Photovoltaics moved in the opposite direction. Mass manufacturing, especially in China, drove costs down aggressively, not by small margins, by orders of magnitude. What used to cost multiple dollars per watt dropped to cents per watt. That kind of decline changes behavior. Because once something becomes cheap enough, efficiency stops being the dominant factor. If you can install more capacity for less money, you do not need each unit to perform perfectly, you just need enough of them. That is exactly what happened. Instead of chasing higher efficiency per unit, the market scaled volume with more panels, more installations, and faster deployment. Now consider timing. A thermal system takes time to build, including permitting, engineering, and construction. Years, not months. During that time, photovoltaic costs continued to fall. This means that by the time a thermal project was completed, it was competing against a cheaper alternative than the one it was designed against. That is a structural disadvantage, not something you fix with better engineering. Now layer in geography. Thermal systems depend heavily on direct sunlight, not just brightness, but direction. They require direct normal irradiance, sunlight that travels in a straight line from the sun to the surface. Clouds, humidity, and atmospheric scattering reduce that. Photovoltaics do not rely on this in the same way. They can use diffuse light, which means they work in more places, more climates, and more conditions. That flexibility matters because it expands the market dramatically. Thermal systems are strongest in very specific regions, dry, clear, high sun environments. Outside of those, their advantage shrinks. Now let us talk about scale. Photovoltaics scale both up and down. You can install them on a utility-scale solar farm, on a single rooftop, or on a remote, off-grid cabin. The same core technology works at every level. Thermal systems do not scale down well. They require a certain size to justify the infrastructure. You cannot realistically build a small, low-cost version for individual use that competes with panels and batteries. That limits adoption to larger projects, and larger projects face stricter financial scrutiny. Now consider reliability again from a different angle. Thermal systems can produce power when needed. That is their strength. But the system itself has more points of failure. Photovoltaics produce when the sun shines, and the system itself is simpler and more resilient. So you have a trade-off between operational flexibility and mechanical simplicity, and in many cases, simplicity wins. Now let us look at water. Many thermal systems rely on steam cycles. Steam needs cooling, and cooling often requires water. In high sun regions like deserts, water is limited. Dry cooling is possible, but it reduces efficiency and increases cost. Photovoltaics avoid this entirely. They do not require water to generate electricity, which removes a significant constraint. Now we come back to storage, because this is where thermal systems still have a real advantage. Storing heat is cheaper at large scale than storing electricity in batteries, and it does not degrade in the same way. That makes thermal systems valuable in specific roles, not as a replacement for solar panels, but as a complement, especially where long-duration storage is needed. Now consider the grid. Traditional power plants provide inertia. Spinning turbines stabilize frequency. Thermal solar systems do the thermal work in the same way. Photovoltaics do not inherently provide that. They rely on inverters. As solar penetration increases, this becomes a real challenge. So thermal systems offer something important, but it is not something most individual users need. It is something grids need, and that shifts where the technology fits. Now let us bring it back to off-grid use, because this is where the concept becomes appealing. A system that runs day and night without batteries sounds ideal, but off-grid systems have strict requirements. They need to be simple, affordable, repairable without specialized tools or parts. Thermal systems struggle here. They require precision components. They require technical knowledge. They require consistent maintenance, which makes them impractical for most individuals, even if the underlying idea is sound. Now, here is the key point. The market did not reject this system because it does not work. It rejected it because something else became good enough at a much lower cost. Photovoltaics do not solve every problem, but they solve enough of them cheaply, and that is often enough. Now that does not mean thermal systems will disappear. They evolve. Hybrid systems are already emerging, using solar panels to generate electricity, then converting excess energy into heat for storage, then converting it back when needed. This approach keeps the simplicity of photovoltaics while adding the benefits of thermal storage, and it avoids the complexity of large mirror fields, which may be where this concept finds its future. Because the core idea of storing energy as heat is not flawed, it is powerful. The scalability challenge is implementing it in a way that aligns with cost and simplicity, and that is what ultimately determines adoption. So when you ask why nobody is using the most powerful off-grid solar system, the answer is not that nobody understands it. It is that the world optimized for something else. Not maximum performance, but minimum cost per unit of useful energy. And once that shift happens, even the most impressive systems can be left behind. Not because they failed, but because something simpler moved faster. Thank you for watching this video. Click here to watch another video that might interest you.